The world was never the same after that moment. The sudden pulse of static, sharp and cold, shattered the peace. It was as if the air itself had frozen, caught in a brief but agonizing moment of silence. The voice that followed sliced through the stillness, a mechanical alien cadence reverberating with an unsettling calmness. "They're already here." For an instant, nothing made sense. Was it a dream? A nightmare? Time hung suspended, taut with the weight of the unknown. And then, it began. The world trembled, shook with the arrival of something beyond comprehension. A transmission, a distorted signal, a message encrypted in a language humanity had never encountered. The protagonist's heartbeat quickened. The truth was now undeniable. The aliens weren't coming. They were already here, and everything they knew was about to unravel. The world wasn't prepared for what followed. As the transmission spread across the globe, governments scrambled to contain the truth, hiding the fact that humanity was no longer alone. But it was too late. The message had been received by all, leaving no corner of the earth untouched. Panic ensued as cities descended into chaos. Streets were flooded with nervous citizens, too frightened to comprehend what had just transpired. In every corner of the world, people heard the message, the chilling words that would haunt them forever. "We've been waiting for you." The world had been altered in a matter of seconds, and with it, the protagonist's life. There would be no returning to what was once known. The truth was out, and the alien forces were already among them. In the midst of the confusion, the protagonist's mind raced. They had lived through loss, hardship and grief, but nothing had prepared them for this. The crushing weight of the truth began to sink in as they stood in the middle of the chaos, struggling to comprehend what was happening. How could this be real? The government had covered up the existence of aliens for years, but now the truth was inescapable. The sky had changed. The air felt different. There was something ominous in the atmosphere, an invisible presence that loomed above. No longer just a message, but a declaration of war, one humanity had never been prepared for. The protagonist clenched their fists, determined to survive whatever came next. As the days passed, the world adjusted to the new reality. Governments scrambled to maintain control, but the sense of unease was palpable. The protagonist, meanwhile, found themselves at the heart of the unfolding storm. They were no longer a mere bystander. Each day brought new revelations, new pieces of the puzzle that seemed too enormous to comprehend. The world had changed. And so had they. In their quiet moments, when the noise of the world subsided, the protagonist couldn't shake the haunting feeling that the aliens weren't just here to invade, they were here for something much bigger, something humanity could never have imagined. They were part of something larger now, and that thought terrified them. But in the midst of the confusion, something unexpected happened. A quiet whisper, barely audible but unmistakable, reached the protagonist's ears. "We've been waiting for you." The words, once spoken by the alien transmission, were now personal. The voice had changed, softened, as if calling out to them directly. It wasn't just a message anymore, it was a summons. And deep inside, the protagonist knew it was meant for them. There was no turning back now. They had been chosen. It was only a matter of time before they understood why. The unknown future stretched out before them, vast and unyielding, but there was no escape. They had to find the truth, no matter what it cost. The protagonist's past was filled with shadows, each step forward weighed down by memories of betrayal, loss and failure. They had never been one to easily trust, having learned the hard way that people were often not what they seemed. Their heart carried the scars of a childhood spent watching those they loved crumble under the weight of broken promises. But all of that was buried deep, hidden beneath the surface, as they focused on surviving each day in a world that had grown increasingly strange. Now, with the aliens' presence undeniable, the world had shifted once again. But in the quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded, the protagonist was haunted by old wounds. Could they ever truly escape their past? And in this new reality, would they be strong enough to face the challenges ahead? As the chaos outside intensified, so did the turmoil within. The protagonist's instincts told them to keep moving, to trust no one, to survive. But their heart, twisted by the betrayals of their past, fought against those instincts. Trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild. Yet, amid the violence and uncertainty, the protagonist began to find a flicker of hope, a potential ally, someone who seemed to see them for who they truly were. For the first time, they felt a pull towards someone else, a connection that transcended the alien invasion. But this, too, was a dangerous game. In this world of lies and manipulation, could they dare to trust again? Thought filled them with a kind of quiet terror. And yet the weight of their loneliness made them wonder, was there any other choice? Trust, the protagonist soon learned, was not easily earned. Their new ally, though offering a hand in this growing storm, had their own secrets. One quiet conversation in a dark corner revealed a truth the protagonist wasn't prepared to hear. There were factions within the government working with the aliens. The government had been hiding far more than just the existence of extraterrestrials. It had been complicit in their agenda. And those who had promised to protect humanity were in fact betraying them. The revelation sent a cold shiver down the protagonist's spine. Their trust in the world, already fragile, was now shattered. The foundation of everything they believed in had been cracked open. And they were left with only one painful truth: nothing was as it seemed. Days passed in a blur of confusion and mistrust. The protagonist struggled to process the magnitude of what they had learned. The government's betrayal was only the beginning. Now, the protagonist had to come to terms with the fact that they had been manipulated for most of their life. It was a cruel irony. The people who should have been their protectors were the very ones responsible for bringing this catastrophe to Earth. Worse yet, there were whispers of an even darker secret, something the protagonist's family might be connected to. They hadn't known it, but their bloodline had been intricately tied to the larger galactic conspiracy. The past they had so carefully hidden seemed to be catching up with them. And in the darkest corners of their mind, a horrifying question began to form. Had they ever truly been free? The deeper the protagonist delved into the truth, the more they realized they were trapped in a nightmare of their own making. The aliens were no longer just an external threat. They were part of a much larger game, one that involved humanity itself. And worse still, the protagonist's own family played a role in this cosmic conspiracy. The truth was relentless, a monstrous weight they could no longer escape. And in the midst of this, they were forced to confront the most painful truth of all. Someone close to them, someone they had trusted, was not who they claimed to be. The ultimate betrayal came not from the government, nor the aliens, but from someone they had let into their inner circle. The question now wasn't just how to survive, but who to trust in a world where nothing was as it seemed. The world was falling apart at the seams. The truth about the government's role in the alien conspiracy had begun to spread, and with it, chaos followed. People were beginning to realize that their lives had been manipulated for decades. The protagonist, now fully immersed in the web of deception, couldn't escape the weight of the knowledge they carried. Every step they took felt like it was on the edge of a cliff. The government, once a pillar of trust, had betrayed humanity. And now, the alien forces too, seemed more than just invaders. They were players in a much larger, far-reaching game. As the protagonist dug deeper, they discovered disturbing evidence suggesting that the alien invasion wasn't random. It was part of a long-planned scheme, one in which humanity had unknowingly been a pawn. The protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, followed by forces far beyond their control. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one of terrifying proportions. With every truth they uncovered, the protagonist found themselves further trapped in the maze of lies. They had discovered a hidden faction within the government that had been collaborating with the aliens for decades. These individuals, some of the most powerful figures in society, had been orchestrating the invasion for their own gain. It was no longer about survival. It was about uncovering the full extent of humanity's betrayal. But the more the protagonist revealed, the more dangerous it became. Allies became enemies, and the people they once trusted now appeared to be agents of this vast, secret war. With their world collapsing around them, the protagonist was left with only one question: who could they trust? Every decision now felt like a gamble, with the stakes higher than ever. Their past, the betrayals, their very identity, all of it was being rewritten in real time. The protagonist's world was becoming unrecognizable. The protagonist had come to realize that the alien forces weren't just invading, they were controlling the narrative. The government, now fully under the influence of these extraterrestrial powers, was working to suppress the truth. The media, the military, even the people themselves, they were all being manipulated. It was a game of control, and the aliens held all the cards. Worse, the protagonist's family was directly linked to this conspiracy. Hidden documents revealed that their bloodline had been part of the original agreement between the government and the alien forces, and they were somehow destined to play a central role in the unfolding events. The protagonist, who had always felt like an outsider, now realized that they were never truly in control of their own destiny. Their family's legacy had always been intertwined with this larger conflict. The more they uncovered, the more they understood. They were a pawn in a game that spanned generations, and they were now at the center of it all. The protagonist's search for answers led them down a darker path than they had ever imagined. The truth about their family's involvement with the alien forces was just the tip of the iceberg. As they continued to dig, they discovered a more terrifying truth. The invasion was not just a war for control of Earth, it was part of a galactic scheme to reshape the balance of power across the universe. Humanity was merely a stepping stone, a piece in a much larger cosmic chess game. The protagonist's role in this plan was unclear, but it was becoming painfully evident that they were connected to the fate of the planet in ways they could not yet understand. The more they uncovered, the more isolated they became. The people they once trusted now seemed to be working against them. And with the alien forces closing in, the protagonist had no choice but to confront the fact that they were at the center of a war that could destroy everything they held dear. The final revelation came in the form of a brutal confrontation. The protagonist's closest ally, the one person they had trusted most, was revealed to be a sleeper agent, a deep cover operative working for the alien forces. The betrayal was devastating, a gut-wrenching blow that shattered the protagonist's fragile sense of trust. The ally, now unmasked, stood before them with an eerie calmness, their eyes no longer human but alien in their coldness. The protagonist, heart-pounding, faced the truth that they had been manipulated all along. Every moment, every decision, had been part of the plan. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. In this moment of pure betrayal, the protagonist was left with only one option: fight back, or be consumed by the chaos. With everything they had known and loved slipping away, they made their choice. There would be no more running, no more hiding. It was time to face the war head-on. The truth, when it finally came, was more horrifying than the protagonist could have imagined. The alien forces weren't just invaders. They were collaborators, working alongside the highest echelons of the human government. This revelation struck the protagonist with the force of a tidal wave. The government had not only been complicit in the alien invasion, but had actively orchestrated it, manipulating humanity for decades. This was not an external invasion. It was a planned merger of two species, one that had been in the works for generations. As the protagonists sifted through the evidence, they learned that their family was at the heart of it all. Their bloodline had been intertwined with this conspiracy for as long as anyone could remember. Their family's legacy wasn't one of heroism, it was a legacy of betrayal. The protagonist was not just a victim of the alien plot, they were a key player in the scheme. The weight of this revelation threatened to crush them. As the full scope of the betrayal became clear, the protagonist's mind raced. How could this have happened? The government, which had once been a trusted institution, had knowingly traded humanity's freedom for power. And worse, the protagonist's family had been central to this scheme. Their ancestors had helped broker the deal with the aliens, paving the way for the invasion. It was all part of a larger plan to reshape Earth into a new alien-controlled world, and the protagonist's bloodline was the key to it. The protagonist had always believed they were a part of something greater, a hero's journey perhaps, but now they realized they were nothing more than a pawn in a galactic chess game. They had no choice but to accept this horrific reality, but the burning question remained: could they change the course of history, or was it too late? The protagonist had spent days combing through the secrets of their family's past, unraveling the twisted web of lies that had been spun over generations. And then they stumbled upon something even more devastating. Their family wasn't just part of the government's pact with the aliens. They had orchestrated it. Their ancestors had been the ones to invite the alien race to Earth, sealing humanity's fate with a promise of power and technological advancement in exchange for control. But as the protagonists dug deeper, they realized that this deal had come with a terrible cost. The aliens weren't just interested in Earth's resources, they were planning to use humanity as a tool for their own expansion. The protagonist's bloodline had made a pact with the alien invaders, and it was a pact that now threatened to destroy everything the protagonist had ever known. In the wake of these revelations, the protagonist found themselves standing at the edge of an impossible choice. With the government fully aligned with the alien forces and their own family's history coming to light, they could no longer stand idly by. They were forced to confront the truth of their own existence. Their role in this intergalactic conspiracy wasn't a simple one. It was tied to the very future of Earth. The protagonist knew that the only way to stop the alien invasion was to expose the truth, but doing so would tear apart everything humanity had built. The world was teetering on the brink, and the protagonist was now the fulcrum. Exposing the truth would shatter the fragile peace, but to do nothing would doom humanity. The choice was agonizing. Was the price of the truth worth the destruction it would cause? As the protagonist stood on the precipice, the realization of what they had to do settled over them like a heavy mantle. The world had changed beyond recognition, and there was no going back. The alien forces were close, and the government's treachery had sealed humanity's fate. The protagonist knew what they had to do. They would take the alien technology and use it against the invaders, but at great cost. In the process, they would risk losing everything that made them human. It was a sacrifice they were prepared to make, but it did not come without a price. The protagonist's body trembled as they prepared for the final confrontation. The only certainty now was that the world would never be the same again. The ultimate showdown was coming, and the protagonist was ready to face it head-on, no matter the cost. The world was on the brink of total collapse. The alien forces had encircled Earth, their ships filling the skies like a dark, foreboding cloud. The protagonist stood in the heart of an underground resistance base, staring at the alien technology they had finally unlocked. Every choice led to this moment, the moment where humanity's fate hung by a thread. The protagonist's hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision before them. The alien weaponry had the potential to turn the tide of the war, but using it came with unimaginable consequences. To activate it would mean losing a part of themselves, their humanity forever altered by the very technology they hoped would save them. The protagonist knew the cost but also understood that doing nothing would lead to humanity's extinction. They had come this far. There was no turning back. It was time to fight, even if it meant losing everything. A silent tension filled the air as the protagonist prepared to unleash the alien weapon. Every moment stretched into eternity, the reality of their decision weighing heavily on their heart. They had thought of all the consequences, how they might lose themselves, how their body and mind would be altered by the technology, but the urgency of the alien forces closing in made the choice seem inevitable. This is it, the protagonist thought, staring at the weapon. In a final act of defiance, they activated the device. An explosion of light and power surged through the room, and the ground beneath their feet trembled as the alien weapon hummed to life. The protagonist's body glowed faintly, the changes starting to take hold. They could feel the power coursing through them, the alien influence seeping into their very being. There was no going back now. The moment the weapon activated, the world seemed to stop. Time slowed as the protagonist's senses sharpened to a level beyond anything they had ever experienced. The alien technology now coursed through them, merging with their own consciousness. They felt connected to the vast collective knowledge of the invaders, but something deeper stirred within them. An inner strength, a defiance against the control the aliens sought to impose. The protagonist's mind raced, now seeing the full scope of the alien invasion plan, they knew what had to be done: take the fight to the heart of the alien fleet. With the new power granted to them by the alien technology, they would have the strength to shatter the invaders' control and lead humanity in the final confrontation. But at what cost? They could feel themselves slipping away, becoming less human with every passing moment. The final confrontation had arrived. The protagonist, now fully aware of their new abilities, stood at the head of the resistance. Armed with alien technology and a newfound understanding of their enemy, they led the charge against the alien fleet. The skies above Earth had turned dark as the invaders began their descent. The protagonist's voice rang out across the battlefield, rallying humanity's forces for the greatest fight they would ever face. "We are not pawns. We will not bow," they shouted. The resistance fought with everything they had, their courage sparked by the protagonist's defiance. The protagonist's alien-enhanced powers allowed them to hold their own against the invaders, their every strike leaving a mark on the alien ships. But they could feel themselves slipping, each moment in combat pulling them further away from their humanity. With every victory, they knew the price of their power was becoming too high. Still, they pressed forward. There was no turning back. The final battle raged on, and the protagonist, now a shell of their former self, knew the time had come to make the ultimate sacrifice. The alien fleet had been damaged, but the war was far from over. The protagonist's body was no longer fully their own, the alien influence having taken root deeper than they had anticipated. As they faced the final alien commander, an overwhelming wave of exhaustion and pain washed over them. The protagonist knew that the weapon they had activated, the power that had given them the strength to fight, was now killing them from the inside out. But they had a choice: unleash the final devastating blow that would end the invasion and save humanity, or fall into the alien thrall forever. With one last act of defiance, they chose to end it. The blast they unleashed was cataclysmic, obliterating the alien command ship and bringing an end to the invasion. As the light from the explosion faded, the protagonist fell, their body collapsing under the weight of their final decision. The war was over, but at a terrible cost. The dust had settled, but the world would never be the same. The alien ships, once towering above the Earth, had been destroyed, their wreckage now scattered across the atmosphere like the shattered remnants of a forgotten nightmare. Humanity had won, but the cost had been unimaginable. The protagonist, now a mere shell of their former self, stood in the ruins of a city once filled with life and promise. The energy from the alien technology had drained them, leaving their body fragile and scarred. They had saved the world, but at the expense of their own humanity. As they gazed over the horizon, they could feel the weight of the decisions they had made. The war was over, but the scars of the conflict would remain forever. The question now wasn't just how humanity would rebuild, but whether they could ever truly recover from the darkness they had faced. In the aftermath, humanity struggled to pick up the pieces. Governments fell, and new alliances were forged in the ruins of the old world. The protagonist, once at the center of the battle, now found themselves on the outskirts of this new world. Their role in the war was undeniable, but they no longer knew where they belonged. They had been changed, both physically and mentally, by the alien technology. They could feel the remnants of it still within them, a constant reminder of the price they had paid. People hailed them as a hero, but all the protagonist felt was emptiness. The cost of victory was too high. As they wandered through the shattered remains of the city, they knew there was no true victory in war. Humanity had survived, but the scars of the past would linger for generations to come. The protagonist's inner turmoil deepened as they tried to reconcile the person they had become with the person they used to be. The alien influence still lingered, an ever-present reminder of the cost they had paid for victory. Every day, they struggled to hold on to their humanity, but the power they had gained in the final moments of battle was now both a blessing and a curse. In private, they could feel the alien technology whispering to them, urging them to embrace its power fully. But the protagonist resisted, knowing that surrendering to it would be the final loss. Still, they wondered, could they ever truly be free? The war had ended, but the personal battle raged on. In the quiet moments, when the world around them was still, they wondered if they could ever truly live again, or if they were doomed to be a shadow of their former self forever. As the months passed, the protagonist's presence in the world became less and less. Their fame as the hero who had saved humanity began to fade, replaced by whispers of their strange, alien-enhanced abilities. The protagonist had hoped that time would heal the wounds of war, but instead, they found themselves drifting further from the people they had fought to protect. The survivors' guilt was overwhelming, and the alien influence still haunted their every waking moment. They had saved humanity, but at what cost? The protagonist knew they couldn't go back to the life they once knew. They couldn't pretend to be the person they had been before the war. As they looked out at the remnants of a once thriving world, they realized that no matter how hard they tried, they would never be able to erase the scars of what had happened. The world had changed, and so had they. The price of survival was a heavy one. One day, as the protagonist wandered through the ruins, they stumbled upon a small group of survivors who had managed to rebuild part of the city. Among them was a child, barely older than a toddler, who looked up at the protagonist with wide, innocent eyes. The child, oblivious to the horrors the protagonist had endured, reached out, as if recognizing something in the protagonist's weary soul. In that moment, the protagonist felt a spark of hope, a glimmer of the humanity they thought they had lost. Perhaps they realized there was still a chance for redemption. The world would never be the same, but in this moment, they saw that humanity could still rebuild, one step at a time. Maybe, just maybe, they could find peace again. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time since the war, the protagonist allowed themselves to hope. The world was beginning to breathe again, but it was a fragile, uncertain breath. The protagonist stood at the edge of a small hill, looking out at the city in the distance, which was slowly starting to rebuild. The scars of the past still lingered, but there was a quiet sense of hope that hadn't been there before. The alien ships, now reduced to fragments, were no longer a looming threat. The battles were over, but the story wasn't. The protagonist could feel the weight of their journey. The loss, the pain, the alien technology that had become part of them. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the future. They had seen what humanity was capable of in the darkest of times, and they couldn't help but wonder what else lay ahead. With each step into the future, the protagonist knew that they had to remain vigilant. The truth of their journey, and the price they paid, would echo through the world for generations to come. Though the world had started its slow recovery, the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows. The alien presence had been pushed back, but the technology they had left behind, the remnants of their invasion, were still scattered across the planet. No matter how many walls were rebuilt, no matter how much land was cultivated, the protagonist understood the deeper truth. Humanity had been changed. The aliens had given humanity a glimpse of the stars, a taste of power far beyond their wildest dreams. Some might seek to use that power for good, but others might fall victim to the temptation of control. The protagonist walked among the survivors, offering their counsel, but never forgetting the dangers that lay ahead. They had won the battle, but the war for the soul of humanity was far from over. In the midst of the rebuilding, the protagonist found themselves returning to the heart of the city, where the war had first begun. The ruins of the government buildings were now being repurposed as centers for new leadership, where those who had survived the destruction were coming together to form a new world order. The protagonist had been offered a position among them, but they hesitated. How could they lead when they themselves had been irrevocably changed? They had once believed in fighting for something greater, but now they questioned whether they had truly understood what it meant to be human. The past haunted them, the memories of those they had lost, the choices they had made. Yet, they knew that their experience had forged them into something stronger. Perhaps it was time to stop looking back and face the future head-on. The final meeting was set in a quiet room, far from the eyes of the public. The protagonist stood before a group of leaders, representatives from the new world that was being forged. The air was thick with anticipation as they discussed the next steps for humanity. The protagonist, now bearing the scars of war, both visible and unseen, felt out of place. They had been offered a role in this new world, but deep inside they weren't sure they were ready to lead. How could they, after all they had been through? Yet, as the leaders spoke, the protagonist felt something stir within them. It wasn't just the weight of leadership, it was the realization that the battle wasn't just about survival. It was about guiding humanity to a future where they could coexist with the unknown, a future where trust, hope, and unity were the true weapons against the forces that sought to divide them. It was a new dawn, and the protagonist, though scarred, was ready to take the first step forward. The protagonist left the meeting room with a heavy heart. The world had changed, and so had they. Yet amidst the uncertainty and the scars of the past, there was one thing the protagonist knew for certain: humanity had been given a second chance. They weren't sure what role they would play in this new world, but they knew they couldn't run from it anymore. The choices they had made, the sacrifices they had endured, had brought them to this moment, and the future was still waiting to be written. As the protagonist walked out into the city once more, they allowed themselves a rare moment of peace. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the city. For the first time in a long while, the protagonist could almost believe that the world was healing. There was still so much left to do, but for the first time since the invasion, they could see a glimmer of hope.